All right, so today is a little different for me. My dad, who's the pastor of the church, I don't assume everybody knows that if you're new here today, but my father's the pastor of the church, and he asked me to preach a sermon during Christmas time, and I've never done that before. So it's a little different for me. And you know, most of the time when you're dealing with church, if you don't come to church very much, or if you go to church, most people, if they go to church a few times a year, they usually go at Easter and they go at Christmas, stuff like that. So most of the time when people come in to around Christmas time, they kind of expect what's going to be talked about. You know, they're going to talk about baby Jesus at Christmas time. They're going to talk about Jesus rising from the dead at Easter time. So I was trying to find something a little different way to pull something out of the Christmas story. And I did what I think is a good starting point. I went back and reread the Christmas story. I figured that's a good place to start. Freshen up on it a little bit. So I went back and was reading through it. And so we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to talk about some different things that I think a lot of times that we miss and we skip over when it comes to the Christmas story. But let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed that we as humans have this like innate ability, or we just want everything to fit together, everything in our lives, everything that happens, every event that takes place in our life, we want it to fit together. We want all the dots that are out there of our life, we want them all to connect and create this beautiful picture. And we all have this underlining sense of purpose. We feel like everything has to have a purpose. Everything that happens in our life, it needs to have a purpose. I kind of picture it like this, and you can have your own metaphor, but I kind of picture different events in our life are like different books that we have in our library, right? And we have different shelves, and certain things happen, and you know exactly where to place that book, what shelf to put it on. You know, you get married, you're like, oh, that's a really good event. I know exactly where to put that on my shelf in my life. You know, a child's born, firstborn child comes into your life. Oh, that's a great thing. I know where to put that on the shelf in my life. And then it gets a little bit harder whenever certain events happen, things that aren't really good. Bad things happen. We kind of stand back and you kind of hold the book and you're like, where does this fit? Where does this fit at in my life? Like, what shelf do I can't make sense of this. Where do I put this at? And so we have a lot of phrases that we use, not just in the United States, like all over the world. Obviously, they won't say it in English; they'll say it in other languages. But we have different sayings, different things. Tell me if you've heard anything like this. Everything happens for a reason. You ever heard somebody say everything happens for a reason? Really? Does it? Does everything happen for a reason? Like this morning, Steve brought me a chicken biscuit from McDonald's, and I appreciate that, Steve. My stomach's not really growling right now. But what if he'd have got me a sausage biscuit? Did that chicken biscuit happen for a reason? I mean, did the Lord know that the sausage biscuit was going to give my tummy the rumbles up here when I was speaking? Does everything happen for a reason? You know, that's just the skeptic in me that thinks that sometimes, and you know we all do it too. What about this? I don't believe in coincidence. Anybody ever said that? Or heard somebody say, I don't believe in coincidence? Well, yeah, somebody says, I don't believe in coincidence. What does that mean? I don't know, I just don't believe in it. Well, you don't know what it means. How do you believe? What? That don't make no sense. What about this? You just haven't met the right person yet. Anybody ever said that? Don't lie. Raise your hand if you've ever said you just haven't met the right person yet. It doesn't have anything to do with you being just not a very good person. I mean, everybody out there ain't a good person. Got to work on yourself sometimes. If everybody's breaking up with you, you're the common denominator. Let's fix some things. I'm just saying. You know, if everybody says they're breaking up for you and the reason is always the same, there's probably some truth to it. Look in the mirror. Anyway, that's not what this sermon's about. Or this one. This is probably my favorite one. I guess it wasn't meant to be. You ever heard somebody say, I just guess it wasn't meant to be? Like there's a meant-to-beer out there, and they got everything, and they're putting everything together. It just wasn't meant to be. How many of y'all have ever said, I guess it just wasn't meant to be? I've said that so many times in my life. I guess it just wasn't meant to be. And we have this thing in our heart, and it doesn't matter if you're in here today and you're not a Christian. Maybe you got roped into coming. You heard we had good-looking women at this church or something like that. Or there's good-looking men too. I'm married, sorry. But whatever your reason for being here today, it doesn't matter, because even if you're not a Christian, inside of you is a desire for purpose. You want to know that your life amounts to something greater than just the everyday monotony. To me, that is God's thumbprint on your life. That is God's thumbprint on your heart and your life. And so, I was thinking about this yesterday. I'm going to show you a picture. Put that picture up real quick. This is my dog, Gus. Gus is a good old dog. He's I think he's 3, about to be 4. And we rescued him. And, my wife went and said we were going to foster a dog. I'm not going to say don't foster a dog, but if you really like animals, don't foster dogs, because you're just going to have a house full of dogs like we do. But Gus, I was thinking about it, and we have this ritual. Gus, he lives a very, very simple life. He lives a life of luxury. If you're a dog or an animal in our house, you're going to live the high life. You're going to live better than a lot of humans in this world do. It's just kind of the way it is. And Gus, he has this ritual every single night. Whenever I get home, we'll eat dinner or something, and for a few minutes at least, I'll sit in my recliner, kind of relax, kick my feet up, and Gus likes to come and jump in the recliner with me. For at least 20 to 30 minutes, it's like our bonding time or something, and this dog is 100 pounds. He's not little. He's a big old boy. He likes his groceries like his daddy, okay? So he'll come and he'll jump up in my lap, and he puts his head on my chest, and he starts snoring right in my face. He goes to sleep. And I was thinking about it, and I don't think that Gus sits around and wonders how all the pieces of his life fit together. I don't think Gus, at the end of the day, whenever he's laying his head on my chest, I don't think he sits there and he goes, that squirrel that I chased today, there was a reason for that. I almost caught him. Maybe that means there's a blessing coming. Maybe that's what that means. I don't think that Gus sits back and worries about all those kind of things and making everything fit together. But we as humans, we can't help it. We have to make everything make sense. I like for things to make sense. And when tragedy happens, whenever bad things happen in our lives, we talked about this a few weeks ago. We talked about how ways that we can help people that are dealing with tragedy around the Christmas season. Whenever bad things happen, it makes us wonder what the purpose is. And just even this week, some of our close friends are going through something, and it's just like heart-wrenching. And I sit back and I know that they're hurting, and I'm sitting here and I'm hurting for them, and I'm like, what is the purpose of that? Like, why does that, and where does that fit? Why does that have to happen? And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it's been hard for me. This coming Christmas, December 25th, will be 4 years ago that my father-in-law passed away. He died on Christmas Day, and it was a very rough time for me and my wife and her family. And I still don't understand why everything happens the way it does, but whenever bad things like that happen, you sit back and you wonder, what in the world? Why? Why does this have to happen right now? It doesn't necessarily even have to be a death in the family. You could be one of those people. You've been at your job for 25 years. You have job security, and somehow that job security falls through, and you get laid off. I thought I had job security. Where do we take those books? Where do we put those on? What shelves do we put those on whenever bad things are happening to us? And this is a little different, because I feel like that the perfect example of God's purpose for our life, and God's showing us that there is purpose in general, is the Christmas story. Because in the middle of all this randomness, all of a sudden, God decided to come down and send His Son. Just in the middle of a random little town, at a random time, nothing great and crazy about it. Just at that time, God decided that's what He was going to do. And when you look back and you think about, I think about some of the stuff we've been through and people that I know have been through. Even though Christmas can be hard for a lot of people, it gives me a sense of joy to know that He chose this time of year to come. No matter what our situation is, no matter how hard stuff is in our life, no matter how tough things are going for us, this is the time of year that he came. And it's a great, great analogy that we can make in our lives today. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to read from Luke, because we're talking about the Christmas story. Can't really get around that. But I'm going to start with, and we're going to read from Luke. We're going to read a little bit at the beginning of the chapter, and then we're going to get to the end of the chapter and read through the story of Jesus a little bit. So a little backstory. Well, let's say this. So has anybody in the past, let's say 20, 25 years went to college or taken any amount of college classes? Raise your hand. Okay. At some point in time, and this happened to me in a few classes, if you go to a major university, you don't even have to be a big one, you're going to run into some professors at some point in time that will try to kick the legs out from under the credibility of the Bible. They will say it's not credible. It was written by man. Newsflash, everything is. That's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. It's written by man. Everything is genius. Everything. Look around. Everything's written by man. But you know what's funny about it is a lot of people, they kind of kick back from how legitimate the Bible is because of something they heard in college, and the professor told them a certain thing, and they kind of pushed away from faith. And you know what's probably really ironic is I know for a fact that right now some of those professors that said that are sitting in church somewhere. And they probably feel guilty about telling kids that. That's the best kind of amen I've ever got. I appreciate that. So they don't even believe what they said. They feel guilt because they probably led some people down the wrong path. You threw me off a little bit there, but I appreciate that. So we're going to start in Luke chapter 1, starting with verse 1. This is what it says. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. So he's saying many people have got together. We're putting our brains together. And we're trying to figure out all the events that took place in the life of Jesus. We're trying to check all of our sources. It's kind of like if you write a paper, which I'm fixing to finish up my master's, my MBA, and everything in a master's program is writing. Everything. And I hate writing papers. I'm good at it, but I don't like doing it. It's like, you know how you have to have like all these sources at the end. You got your citations, your bibliography. It's basically kind of like he took that and he threw that at the front. He's like, I'm going to let you know right now, I got sources. They're credible. I got eyewitnesses. So, verse 2, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. So they're saying, Luke, so you got eyewitnesses. Yep, got eyewitnesses. Verse 3, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. We talked about old Theo last week a little bit, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. You know how specific that sounds? That doesn't sound like once upon a time. It's very specific for a very, very specific reason, because he wants you to understand this happened. This really happened. I'm going to go ahead and put that out there before we move on. I want you to know at the very beginning, this is legit. This is what happened. Now let's move on. It's so different from once upon a time or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. All right? So, we know that we're dealing with a legitimate occurrence. All right, now we're going to skip down to verse 26, and we're going to continue on from there. Verse 26, in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. Now, see how specific that is? In the 6th month. So they did some actual research. She was in the 6th month of her pregnancy. Well, I don't know what trimester that is. Whatever. Second, third. I'm looking at a nurse. Third trimester. All right, they didn't really use that terminology, I don't think. If they did, that's pretty impressive. But it says, it doesn't really give a very definitive answer on this. It doesn't say if Elizabeth, how she was related to Mary. Some people believe she was a cousin, but it doesn't really matter. It's just we're talking about the specifics of the events going on. So in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph a descendant of David. Now, this is just another arranged marriage, okay? Just another arranged marriage. And this is a very, very important part of the scripture next. This one sentence, I don't think Luke knew when he was writing it. You know, I would like to think that when he was writing this book, that he knew kind of in his heart that this was going to be a big deal, that people for thousands of years would read it. But I don't think he knew how significant this next phrase was. He said the virgin's name was Mary. So if you're a Catholic in here, there you go. All right? We're making you feel like you're at home today if you're a Catholic. We're talking about Mary a little bit. All right? The virgin's name was Mary. So let's think about this. Let's think about all of the things that are done because of this statement. You have a new religion. You have cathedrals built in the name of Mary, martyrs, crusades, hospitals built in the name of Mary, Christian music, Mary, did you know? That's a oldie but a goldie. Let's see, you got bumper stickers, you got statues everywhere of Mary because of this statement. The virgin's name was Mary. Now, if you take a step back, let's think about how Mary's life would have been if Gabriel hadn't have come to her. All right, so Mary was arranged to be married to Joseph, and more than likely, they wouldn't have actually met each other until the day they got married. That's kind of the way it worked. That's weird. That's awkward, right? Like, it's hard enough. Like, when I remember my wedding day, I was never so sure that I was supposed to be married, but when I got up there, I was like, oh, God. Like, this is scary. It's a very scary. Like, there's all these people here, and I'm like, oh, good Lord. I can't even imagine doing that, and you don't even know the person. Like, what is that? They need to, and they still do that in a lot of cultures. That needs to change. That's craziness. That's crazy. But that's a lot of times that's the first time they would meet, okay? And they would have went about their life. They would have probably had a few kids. They'd have lived a relatively meager type life, nothing crazy happening. And in that time, there was what was going on. They called it like the 400 years of silence. God hadn't really spoke to the people in 400 years, so there was nothing major spiritual happening at that time. And they would have had some kids. Maybe if they were lucky, they would have lived long enough to see grandkids, and they would have died. And then probably 30, 40 years after their death, nobody would even remember their name. But that's not what God saw for Mary. In all that simple, random life, God decided to come down to Mary. So let's go to verse 28. The angel went to her and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary was greatly troubled at his words and wondered what kind of greeting this might be. I bet she was. Okay, I watched too many scary movies, and if something appeared to me in my bedroom, it's going to catch a magazine. Not the kind you read. All right, I'm going to be shooting holes in the wall, and it's not going to be a pretty sight, okay? But obviously, she was a little troubled, a little bewildered, and she didn't know, okay, is this the good witch or the bad witch here to see me? What's going on with this spirit that I'm seeing, this angel that I'm seeing in this room? But the angel said to her, "Do not be afraid. Mary, you have found favor with God. You have been singled out for a purpose." Right here, this is God showing up in human history. This is when he showed up in human history. And it gets a little more complicated as we go. Verse 31, basically what happens is the angel keeps raising the stakes to Mary. So you've effectively scared the mess out of her. All right, she's sitting there. You keep raising the stakes on her. Let's tell her a little bit more. Let's throw a little more pressure on old Mary. "You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever. His kingdom will never end." At this point, she's got to be thinking, kingdom? There hasn't been an independent Jewish king in over 500 years. How is my child, born to me, going to be a king? Verse 34, she says, "How will this be?" Mary asked the angel, "since I am a virgin." Now, right here, this is where I've kind of thought back to when people read, I'm guessing if you come to our Christmas Eve service, haven't talked about it with Pastor yet, but there'll probably be a reading of the story of the birth of Jesus. And I've never heard anybody stop and actually talk about this next verse. We kind of speed through it because it's a little weird. Okay? It gets a little weird. And I like to kind of imagine, Luke's writing this out. I wonder how many drafts of this verse he had. How many drafts he had to sit back and write. This is what he said. "The angel answered, 'The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God.'" The Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. So I wonder how many drafts of that he had. Sitting back, let me mark that one out. God's the baby daddy. No, that don't sound good. That ain't right. No, that ain't good. He chose his words very, very carefully. Now let me ask you this. It says, he will be called the Son of God. Even if you're not a Christian, everybody in the room, has anybody in the room ever heard Jesus called the Son of God? Raise your hand. So he was right. He was right. The angel was correct. He will be called the Son of God. You will know him as the Son of God. And in that time, when Mary heard that, she thought that was blasphemous almost to even think that. How could she give birth to the Son of God? That's craziness in her mind. Even Elizabeth, verse 36, even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age, and she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. Let's go back and think about the whole kingdom thing. His kingdom will never end. For Mary, that had to be strange to think about, because every kingdom in that time period, every kingdom that came along, these great kingdoms, everybody would say it's never going to end. You had the Babylonian Empire, and everybody's like, oh, it's so strong and powerful, it'll never end. And then they got overthrown by the Persians. The Persians took over. A lot of the great movies, war movies, are about the Persian Empire. Anybody ever seen like 300 and stuff like that? You shouldn't be watching those kind of movies. But the Persians were the ones in charge, and their empire was huge. And before you know it, Alexander the Great swept all throughout and took over, and nobody ever thought Alexander the Great would be taken down. Before you know it, the Roman Republic arose, turned into the Roman Empire. Now this, the birth of a king, to me, she's thinking, Mary? So we're beginning to wonder, what's the point of this? What's the purpose of this? She's sitting back and she's like, okay, I'm sitting here and this angel comes to me. I feel like I'm nobody. Where do I put this book? Where does this go? I'm going to have the Son of God? I don't know where to put that in the scope of my life. And, after that, this is kind of like my favorite part of the story. Because after the angel leaves, Gabriel leaves, he's told her all this. He leaves and she doesn't see him again. And if you're a Catholic in here today, don't get all bent out of shape. We're going to talk about Mary a little bit, not necessarily in a bad way. But we're going to call Mary Miss Highly Favored. Okay? Mary, Miss Highly Favored. So Mary doesn't hear from the angel again, and things get pretty bad after the angel leaves. Things get difficult. Next thing you know, she was able to work it out with Joseph. He had a dream. The angel showed him, she was telling the truth. She ain't running around on you. Pretty significant piece there. That still would be kind of difficult, but Joseph's a good man. I always remember that. He's a good man. Stuck by her. But so the next thing you know, she's into her pregnancy, and word comes from Caesar Augustus that there's going to be a census taken, which means they're just going to count all the people, and you got to go home to do that. So they had to go home to Bethlehem. And that was a good 80 to 100 miles from where they were at. So we have this pregnant woman. There's not airplanes, not trains, no Ubers, none of that stuff. So imagine this conversation. Joseph goes up to a pretty pregnant Mary. He's like, hey, babe, you're going to have to jump on this donkey, and we're going to have to go for a ride. Okay, we got a little ride. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever been on a very long car ride with a pregnant woman? A long car ride sucks with a pregnant woman. Can you imagine a long donkey ride? That had to be terrible. And the Bible leaves out all these little details. It gives you the highlights on a lot of stuff. I just would have liked to have been a fly on the donkey watching their conversation, because it wasn't happy and joyous. It's my feet's hurting. Why are we doing this? I'm sorry, it's okay, we're almost there. You said that yesterday. We're almost... Like, I have a feeling that Miss Highly Favored was at Joseph's throat most of this trip. Things were getting rough. There's probably times she was wondering, hey, Gabriel, can you come back now? Help me out. If I can be given, I can become pregnant, you can surely, transport me to Bethlehem. If this is possible, that's surely possible. We can teleport or something, Or, even better, whenever she's going and telling her mama that she's pregnant from God. Imagine that one. She's probably sitting there thinking, hey, Gabriel, I need you right now. Come tell my mama what you told me, because she ain't believing me. Okay? So she's wanting Gabriel. She had to want Gabriel to come down and help her out with all this stuff. So, you all know the story. They're on their way, and they get there super late. It takes them longer than they thought. And when they get to Bethlehem, there's what? There's no room in the inn. Gabriel, you couldn't have made me a reservation. You knew I was going to be going to Bethlehem. Why couldn't I get a reservation? I got to be out here in this barn with these animals. Miss Highly Favored of God, gets there, and there's no rooms. Then it gets even worse, and we kind of gloss over this too. We read this pretty quick when we're reading the Christmas story. King Herod hears that this prophecy has apparently been fulfilled and that a king was born. So somebody that's a jealous king like King Herod was, he does something terrible. He decides, you know what? I'm going to issue a decree that all males 2 years old and younger be killed. And Mary and Joseph, they get a warning, and they're able to leave and flee to Egypt. But that morning, as families wake up, Roman soldiers, they go around and they slaughter 2 years old and under. And it's supposed to be just the boys, but the Roman guards were very thorough, and most historians believe that they killed most of the girls too. Because they would rather go back to Herod and say, we killed some of the girls too, than say we might have missed some of the boys. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Where does that fit for those people? Watching your child be slaughtered, your baby. It's hard enough, I believe, ever losing a child at any point in their life. But having a baby murdered like that, I can't imagine. Where does that book in their life, where does that fit? Where does that go? And Mary probably feels some guilt because she got warning that was going to happen. And she sat back sometimes and thought, why was it just me that got warned? Why didn't God come down and kill King Herod so that I didn't have to happen? We do that a lot, don't we? Bad things happen, and we try to rationalize it. Our mind, we cannot wrap around why things are happening the way they're happening. And it don't matter what situation in your life you're going through, hard times. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that person deserves this. No, it's hard. It messes with people, and it knocks them off the balance that they have going in their life. And there's not always an answer. There's not always a reason. You may go the rest of your life and never understand why some of the things that happen to you actually happen to you. And I told them in first service, I like to I like to think about heaven. Does anybody like to think about heaven sometimes? Think about heaven. I think, I don't just think about heaven because I think it's going to be a wonderful place. I kind of think about heaven for selfish reasons, mainly because I think about the people that I'm going to get to see again. I think about loved ones, like seeing my grandpa and, all these people in my family, seeing my father-in-law and just hanging out with them. And I think about that kind of stuff sometimes. And I've thought about, whenever I get to heaven, I'd like to have a sit down with God. I'd like to say, all right, I know they probably DVR'd my whole life. Okay, there's a DVR with like 2 trillion terabytes filled up in my life. Like, there's some times in my life, God, I want to go back. Can we watch this and can you tell me what was going on? Why that had to happen the way that happened? Why I had to go through that? Why my family had to go through that pain? Mary was able to, she was able to get Jesus to safety as a child. And all those children, they were slaughtered. But about 33 years later, Mary would listen in a courtyard as Jesus was beaten to within an inch of his life. He was mocked. He was crucified. And the Romans were really good at crucifying. They had almost turned it into an art form. They knew how to squeeze every last ounce of life out of you. They can make it last. They can make the suffering last. And she's probably sat there at that exact moment and she thought, where does this fit? Why is this happening? Why does this have to happen the way it does? And we know the end of that story. It ends good. The story ends great. That's not the point. We sit back and we wonder why these things have to happen. The timing's terrible. It's never a good time. But why we have to endure these things? Was it just, she was probably sitting there wondering, is this just a random act of violence that my son had to be crucified? And was she just one more broken-hearted mother? But from that vantage point, from our vantage point in time, we can see that it wasn't random. There was a purpose behind it. God's thumbprint was on that entire situation. And there's sometimes you will be able to step back in your life as time goes on, and you can see how God worked things out good for you. You can see how things worked out good for you. And sometimes you don't. You just got to trust Him. You got to trust that all things will work together for the good of those who love Him. I'm going to read you a scripture that Paul wrote. It was 25 years later, after the resurrection of Jesus, from Ephesians 1, verse 11. In Him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of Him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of His will. This is what I think a lot of times we have the wrong idea of faith. We have the wrong outlook on what faith actually is. I believe perfect faith is not faith that moves God. It's not faith that moves God. Perfect faith is faith that moves us to trust God when He doesn't seem to be moving. When it doesn't look like God's moving in your life, when it feels like He's not there, believing that there's a reason, believing there's a purpose will help you get through the times that you just don't understand. I don't understand a lot that happens. I don't understand why some of my friends are going through a terrible time in their life, and I look at it and I'm like, how in the world can this be worked out for good? How? What possible way is this going to turn out good? But at Christmas time, God sent His Son to a random town to show that God is with us. We gloss over, and I've always heard the term God with us at Christmas. And it took on a new meaning for me as I got ready for this sermon. I never really, how like you can read the Bible. Maybe some of you can, you can understand what I'm saying, but you read certain scriptures over and over and over, and then just one day you read it, and it just totally means something different. You get something totally different out of it. And I've always heard the term God with us. And I just kind of thought it was like a line in a song and just a quick scripture grab type thing. Sounds good. God came down to be with us, not only to die for us, but to show us that there is purpose in the most random of situations. The most random of things that's going on in your life, there is purpose. And I want to close by going back. I want to go back to the end of the meeting with Gabriel and the angel. Okay? And I saved this last verse at the end of this story for a reason, because I hope, and just to kind of give you insight, whenever I speak, whenever I'm up here talking, I'm usually speaking to myself. It's something that I'm dealing with. It's an issue that I'm having, a certain area of my life. Christmas has been hard for me and my wife and my family for a while now. And I wasn't really looking forward to preaching a Christmas sermon. But to be honest, it really helped me. It gave me some peace. This is what I hope, that no matter what's going on, I hope that we can respond the way that Mary did. At the end of the chapter, in verse 38, after Gabriel had spoke to her, this is what she said. After he told her all that stuff, all the hard things that was going to come, all the crazy stuff, she looked at him and said, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said. That's difficult. That's hard. Obviously it is. I can barely talk about it. Whenever things are going bad, can we sit back, even when it feels like God's not moving, when He's not there, and can we say, I trust you? That's what I want for you for Christmas. I'm turning into my father. I don't usually cry in front of people. He's a big baby, and I think I'm turning into him as I get older. But that's the way it goes at Christmas time. Christmas is a joyous time. I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying. I love Christmas. Even though it's been difficult, it's one of my most favorite times of year. And I think it is for most people. But no matter what you're going through, if you're struggling, you may not be struggling right now, but you'll be struggling at some point. I want you to remember, even if it's not Christmas season, that amidst all the randomness, there is purpose. And that God is with you. God is with us.